Good morning and welcome back to the policy session for the Board of Clackamas County Commissioners on May 11, 2022. Gary, what's up next?
Yes, thank you, Chair Smith. We are still on the topic of middle housing. This is financial incentives for middle housing. We have from Transportation and Development, Dan Johnson, the Director of Transportation and Development, and Deidre Landon, Administrative Services Manager. Go ahead, please.
We were going to make this quick. We're going to make it quicker. I just want to be clear with the board. We are speaking directly from the materials that are in front of you. Okay, we're going to do a brief summary from the policy session document, and we're going to focus more specifically on attachment A of your packet and attachment D of your packet. So with that, we are here. HB 2001 requires us to consider ways to increase the affordability of middle housing and get direction from the board on whether or not they'd like to pursue these, okay? So there are 3 items here, one of which is waiving or deferring SDCs, systems development charges. Second, assessing a construction excise tax, which we do not currently. And third is adopting or amending criteria for property tax exemptions. So with that, if we could move to attachment A. Let's briefly start with waiving SDCs. Local governments rely on these monies that are collected for capital improvements in a variety of infrastructure systems. These are capacity improvements. These are dollars that are collected from a developer at the time permits are issued that are targeted towards specific capital or capacity improvement projects. The only SDC that the county directly impacts is the transportation SDC. We do have the ability through your role through Water Environment Services to adjust theirs for stormwater and sanitary, but we're specifically talking about transportation today. I want to make sure that you understand the fact that those SDCs are basically predicated on our transportation system plan that's developed. We look at what projects are there that provide capacity. We look at trip rates. We look at the cost of those projects. We look at trips that are generated and assign those trips to certain uses. And so those trips that are generated by certain uses then go through a mathematical computation to figure out how much SDC you'll pay on a specific project. I guess the one thing I will say in the interest of time, the recommendation before you does not suggest that we waive SDCs. But I want to plant the seed. Should the board desire staff to go assess this further, we would ask that basically any waiver of SDCs be incorporated in a methodology update. Because if you think about the fact that you are collecting dollars for a certain amount of projects, and if you take one of those revenue sources out, you have a funding gap. And so to fill that funding gap, essentially what you would have to do is go back and do a reassessment through the methodology to transfer those dollars into other uses, okay? And if we can talk about that in more detail should the board desire. What you do see in the recommendation before you today, Clackamas County has been a leader through the great work of Deidre Landon, who's joining me today, and others in our SDC implementation. We do have tools within that current adopted SDC methodology that do support housing types of different sizes. In 2018, there was a discussion on right-sizing our residential fee. To look at square footage of houses, et cetera, and that was adopted in 2020, and we can talk more about that. But essentially, at this point in time, staff has not recommended to the board any additional changes. Those are tools that are at your disposal now that we can implement to support middle housing. Secondly, it talks about deferring of SDCs. Deferring is an interesting word because currently deferring theoretically is that I'm not going to pay my SDCs now, I'm going to pay them later. We do have the ability to defer SDCs currently through our installment plan. We have an installment plan that's in place that allows individuals to apply for a request to theoretically defer payment of those over a 10-year period. And we can discuss that in more detail. But again, those tools are available to the board now and are available to any use that we have, commercial, residential, whatever it may be. So I'm going to move on to CET, and this is still on attachment A. So this is a construction excise tax, okay? So this is basically a tax that would be assigned or collected by the county on either commercial or residential development, okay? I want to reiterate again, we currently do not do this, but I want to run through the two types of excise taxes there are. One, residential construction excise tax. A city or a county may impose a construction excise tax at 1% or less of the permit valuation on residential development. This includes both new and construction that results in additional square footage. There are requirements around this tax and where it can be directed. 50% of the funds can be used to fund developer incentives related to affordable multifamily developments. 15% of the funds distributed to the Housing and Community Service Department to fund home ownership programs, and 35% for programs and incentives related to affordable housing as defined by the county. Second, there's a commercial construction excise tax, and those requirements differ. A city or county may also impose a construction excise tax on commercial or industrial development, with 50% of those funds being used to fund programs of the county related to housing, and 50% basically is not prescribed by law. It would basically go into theoretically the general fund, and those dollars could be redirected to support housing however the board sees fit. We have not, if the BCC is interested, let's back up. We have numbers to share with the board should they desire that information. We have assessed this previously. There was a request from H3S a number of years ago to look at basically what our permit volumes were, the cost of those permits, how much revenue this would generate, and we can share that with you should the board desire. But at this time, should the board desire additional discussion or possible implementation of a CET, we'd look for time to kind of discuss with H3S about how those programs would be developed, what kind of revenue sources would be directed there, and a more detailed focus on the value of residential or construction excise tax. Right now, staff general opinion is the fact that the commercial excise tax allows more flexibility by statute than the residential, but that is a discussion we would have to do a deeper dive on should the board desire us to do so. Last but not least, we are going to talk briefly from Attachment D. And Attachment D is dealing with property tax exceptions, or exemptions, pardon me. For the record, I am not a property tax expert. We have Lynn Longfellow from the A&T in the audience, but I'm going to basically run through this memo and just share with you different tools that are out there. I want to be clear that these are tools that are established by ORS. As you will see from the discussion, there aren't a lot of jurisdictions implementing them. Nor does our specific group have a lot of experience in implementing them. So should the board, as with CET, wish to assess this option further, we'd have to go back and do some additional analysis with our partners in assessment and taxation. ORS 307-515 to ORS 5-523. These exemption requirements that are called out in statute are viable to be implemented by Clackamas County. Okay? This is the first topic on page 1 of Attachment D. I want to draw your just focus to a couple of lines in this section, one of which is I want to make sure you understand the taxing districts making up 51% of their rate must opt in. This isn't a decision that's made by Clackamas County. It would have to be a decision from multiple taxing partners to implement this program. The purpose of this program is to provide exemptions for new construction rehabilitation that provide low-income housing for tenants with income of 60% or less of median. It's a 20-year exemption period. And again, currently within Clackamas County, we're not aware, the assessment office has no knowledge of any governing body within the county that has adopted this resolution. Okay. Moving on to the next set of exemption criteria, ORS 307-540 to ORS 307-548. Two additional, to a brief summary, the county can implement this exemption. I want to highlight again, 51% of the taxing districts must opt in, so it's not a decision the county makes on their own. It would have to be a discussion with those other taxing districts. The purpose is to provide exemptions for existing, new, and rehabilitated property owned by a nonprofit corporation or partnership that provides low-income housing for tenants with income of 60% or less of median income in their first year of occupancy and 80% thereafter. It is a year-to-year exemption. There are two cities which have adopted this. That is essentially the city of Wilsonville, who they currently have 5 multifamily complexes ranging in size from 30 to 144 units. Their total exempt assessed value is fiscal year 21-22 is approximately $17 million, based on the information before me today. Second is the city of Milwaukee. Currently, there is 1 complex with 28 units that's been exempted. And for their fiscal year 21-22, the exempt assessed value is approximately $3.1 million. I'm going to move on. Actually, I'm going to skip the next one, ORS 307-651 to 307-687, because this is only applicable to cities. And last but not least, I believe, is ORS 308-450 to ORS 308-481. Again, can be adopted by the county. This has some focus on distressed areas, and that is defined in the information provided to you, but essentially is to encourage the rehabilitation of existing units. This is a freeze on assessed value that remains for 10 years from time of application. And again, the assessment office has is not aware of any jurisdiction that's implemented this program. So with that, that's a lot of information really quick. Actually, it's a glance of information really, really quick. I'm going to go back to the recommendation that can be found in your study session materials. And essentially, there are 2 options we put forward for the board to consider. One is to direct staff to take the necessary next steps for developing a draft program for any of the specific tools the board would like to consider for supporting the affordability of middle housing. Or option number 2, direct staff to use existing tools, which include our tiered residential SDC rate. And our recommendation is for option number 2, use our existing tools at our disposal. That's
Thank
a
you,
lot.
Dan.
We tried to make it quick. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I'm sure my commissioners would like to opine, and you're right, this is complicated. I just have a quick question. How many CETs are available in Clackamas County? And I ask that question because doesn't Metro have one that overlays what we do? And I'm hearing a yes.
We do.
There's a Clackamas County one, there is a Metro one. Does this apply to what Metro takes out of our citizens' pockets?
The construction excise tax presented here in this packet would be separate and in addition to the
But
Metro.
there is a Metro CET.
Yes.
That's also being taken out. So every time we tweak with this, taxes for, and SDCs is what you pay in advance for using the system, okay? It goes to affordability. Increase or decrease in CETs also goes to affordability. So in the county, what is our CET used for? Just briefly state again, because you presented a lot of information.
We do not currently collect a CET at the county. We have to collect it on behalf of Metro, though, and those dollars are redirected to Metro for their disposal.
Well, then you're confusing me what my just previous question was to Deidre. I said, how many CETs are collected in the county? And you, Deidre, you said this was the county one, not the Metro one.
So for unincorporated Clackamas County, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but for unincorporated Clackamas County, the only CET that is collected currently, to the best of my knowledge, is Metro's.
Okay. So when Metro collects a CET, how much of that do we get back?
We, those
Thank you,
CET.
Paul. I think you answered my question.
Those CET programs that are competitive programs that
Competitive.
that we have to compete for those dollars through grant programs to
What
get
is
back.
it used for? I mean, it's just go, I mean, they just collect the tax, take it, and it disappears. I want to know what a CET does.
So by statute, CET has got to be focused on future development, okay? So it's got to be predicated. So we have CET grants that fund.
Come to the mic, please.
Karen Berg, would you please come forward and state your name, your department, and just let us know what those are. If anybody else wants to opine on a CET, I don't know how this board can go further thinking a CET is one thing, and then we discover, oh, gee, it's not. And it's from my information. Maybe my board is smarter than me on CETs, but Karen, please go ahead.
So the construction excise tax, so I'm Karen Burig. I'm the long-range planning manager at Clackamas County. The construction excise tax that's collected by Metro, it's my understanding that that funds their 2040 grant application process. And so an example of the project that we had received funds to be able to implement was our Park Avenue project. So the different types of projects that they fund are projects that provide the opportunity for increased development and be able to perhaps change the zoning or encourage investment, encourage development. So there's a whole suite of types of projects, but that's an example of one that's here in Clackamas County.
Okay, maybe we'll have more questions on that later. Thank you, Karen. We have a couple of commissioners in the queue. I think, Shoal, you were up first.
Yes, the folks in Salem in their House Bill 2001 and these 3 ideas for making middle housing, increasing the affordability on middle housing. Middle housing already has a break that other new construction doesn't have, and that is middle housing is already going in on an existing lot as opposed to a builder who has to buy a new bare lot down the street and has to pay a premium on it because they're all expensive. So middle housing already gets a break in that regard. The idea of a new construction excise tax is going in the wrong direction. 1% on a $500,000 house is $5,000 additional at the time of permits. That would not fly well. And also the idea to exempt property taxes on middle housing would make it unfair for the guy down the street who's building a house and doesn't get that break. So, Mr. Johnson, could you, when it gets down to your transportation SDC, the tiered residential SDC rate, could you explain how that might give a special break to middle housing projects that would potentially negatively affect a builder down the street who's not doing a middle housing project?
It wouldn't necessarily give a negative impact, but it provides flexibility and a cost break for units of smaller size. So it right sizes our SDC. And so if it depends on what that developer down the street would be building.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So that wouldn't have a negative effect on me if I'm building a house down the street from your middle housing project.
It's your conscious decision about the project you'd like to build and the size of that project.
Got it. I
Yep.
understand. Okay, good. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I'm going to try and remain calm when I say this. So the CET, Milwaukee adopted the CET, and I think they actually have a lot of leverage on what they can do with their CET. And I think that how it's drafted, I think it's, again, they can move it around and do a number of things with it. And metros, it's more of a grant type, or they can apply it to things, and it's selected by them, and we don't have much control over it, other than we can ask for some of it in a form of a grant for a particular project. Where I'm going with this, as far as this, what's before us today, is that, I suppose if I was aware of a populated area that had up-to-date infrastructure, had up-to-date transportation options and facilities, and all of that, I would probably be pretty open and considerate to, waiving SDCs or even some taxes, right? Property taxes, but we are in an area, we have a jurisdiction over an area where this applies, where most of the area is not there, right? Transportation, for example, transportation SDC. Where do we have adequate transportation as it applies to transit and everything else? And really, we don't have much in the way of that at all. And go to our last discussion about infrastructure and the needs out there, they're overwhelming. And yet, at the same token, the way the system is what's getting baked in as it relates to, and I'll be really brief on this, we are being penalized for not having, or the citizens are being penalized essentially for not having access to transit alternatives as we look at tolling or congestion pricing, whereas you're supposed to change your behavior, but you don't have a means in which to change your behavior to get back and forth to work or the doctor. So, it's grossly unfair. maybe the situation is different in Portland. Maybe the legislators who passed this were in neighborhoods in Portland where they had transit, where they had a number of these things. They had adequate infrastructure. We don't have it here. That's what's wrong with this bill. That's what's wrong with this ask. I can't support any of these three until we have some criteria that says, you know what? This particular application has everything. There's transit nearby. There's great infrastructure. There's no need. There's no system development charge or infrastructure needs in this area. Maybe that could be eligible for a waiver, but most of the area is not.
Thank you, Paul. There are two recommendations before us today. Number one, direct staff to take necessary steps for developing a draft program for any of the tools I mentioned before. Two, consider for supporting the affordability of middle housing. Or number two, direct staff to use existing tools, which includes tiered residential SDC, TSDC, transportation SDC. So, Commissioners, what do you want to do today? It's time for an action. We need to move this along. We have two more really heavy policy sessions coming up, so we can decide to do something on this or not decide. I'm sorry, I think it was Commissioner Fisher. Were you in next?
I think we did
Go
the
ahead.
same time.
Go ahead.
So Dan, remind me, when we had the homelessness and housing task force meet back beginning 2018, I believe, the construction excise tax was one of the recommendations for Clackamas County out of that group
I believe that's to be the case.
that we were considering, and that was a lot of realtor, home builders, community partners thought that that would be a good idea. I don't know that I'm prepared today to suggest that we incentivize middle housing, but I am all about incentivizing the development of housing that's more affordable. And all of these tools, it seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, but if we have existing tools, they could be maybe a little bit more robust, and we could review them. But if we do take that approach, which is, I'm absolutely confident because it's right here on our, this is our Bible of initiatives, that we, increasing housing supply. Can we look at it bigger than just middle housing for what incentivizes?
That's a great intro, because one of the things I wanted to make sure the board was clear about,
Which I don't.
this is just the considering part as it relates to HB 2001. It does not limit your ability as the Board of County Commissioners to possibly implement one of these things at a future date once there's been a deeper dive around some of this stuff. It's simply around the fact that we need to check a box as it relates to HB 2001 and make sure we brought this in front of you for your consideration. So the motion today and or approval of the motion today does not limit your ability in the future to come back and talk about this. And there have been discussions, and I know that coming from the Housing Task Force, I know coming from H3S, about a more detailed, deeper look at the use of construction excise tax as it goes forward. And we stand ready to be a partnership in that discussion. And this decision today does not limit that. If the board wishes to bring that forward again, we can do that.
Because it seems to me that the best policy perspective would be for not just middle housing, but for everything in Clackamas County.
I think it's well noted. Yes, I think that's important, too.
Okay,
But
thank you, Chair Smith.
Unfortunately, that is not the question before us at this moment.
It informs my
It's
decision.
HB 20-001, but thank you for that. We have three other lights on. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Yes, these three ideas from the rocket scientists in Salem on HB 2001 would not reduce the cost of housing in Clackamas County. It would increase it. And so the only thing we can do today that's reasonable is number two, direct staff to use existing tools, which includes tiered residential TSDCs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. Gary, you're up, and then Commissioner Schrader.
Dan, what's the deadline for a board to make some sort of a decision? I assume it's also by July 1st as other components are implemented, or not?
I'm not sure if there was a set deadline, but I would assume
I
it would
don't think
align with
there's a
that deadline that we
deadline
have.
on this one, is
Yeah.
there? Is there a deadline? Somebody come forward, please.
Yep, we checked the box.
Congratulations, you just met it by talking about it today.
Oh, okay, got it, all right. Thank you, we're talking about it. Commissioner Schrader, you're up.
Yeah, so this talks about middle housing. Middle housing to me is 60% below AMI.
No, it's 2001.
No.
Middle housing as it relates to the topic you just discussed about
Right.
H2
It's-
2001.
it's not-
It does not have any correlation to AMI.
It's not related to anything then from HUD in terms of affordability. Okay, I just wanted to
Yep.
get that clear in my own head.
you are
Okay, that's
correct.
it. It's just increasing the capacity, and it still has the market element then of letting the market go.
It
Yeah,
is
it's not-
tools to incentivize the type of housing that you had just discussed about with Martha here previously. And that's all it is.
Okay.
Has no
Okay.
correlation to AMI, incomes, et cetera.
Okay,
Pardon me, except for the tax exemption language that we discussed here briefly, because that does have some tie.
okay.
And
So if today we were to take option 2 and maybe have an opportunity to look, I'd have to look at what the housing report from 2018 again. I mean, I don't have that at the top of my head right now, but we could move ahead with option 2 and then take a look at some of that. And once again, none of this is written in stone that we can come and revisit, but at least we're getting a pathway forward for the immediacy of making this happen.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas.
I make a motion to approve option 2, direct staff to use existing tools, which includes tiered residential TSDC rate.
Seconded.
Okay, Commissioner Savas has made a motion that we adopt option 2, staff recommendation. I'm trying to find language, I can't see it here. And Commissioner Fisher has seconded that motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Tony, please call the poll.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much, staff, for coming forward. This was extremely complicated. I'm sure it's not the end of our discussions for the future either, but at least we made a decision today. Gary, what's up next?
All right, next, libraries, commissioners. Let's start with the Gladstone Library construction. Cindy Becker, who is a project manager in county administration, she is the lead on this project on my behalf, but there are multiple county departments that are working on this, business and community services in particular. So today, this first session is on the Gladstone Library. The next session is on the Oak Lodge Library, but we're going to start with the Gladstone Library. So, welcome, Cindy.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Gary. I'm Cindy Becker, and I work in county administration. And thank you very much for having me here. And we are, whoa,
Apologies.
wow. And we are here at the first policy session to talk about the Gladstone Library. This policy session is a follow-up from the one that you held in November of 2021. During that time, the board had approved moving forward with the Gladstone Library with a $7 million budget. That included $200,000 from ARPA monies that the board graciously agreed to provide. However, we are requesting, again, direction from the board regarding next steps because of some significant cost increases that have happened since the approval in November. So two major issues have arisen. One is questions about repayment of a revenue bond. The initial funding for the Gladstone Library included a revenue bond that would be partially paid by library operating dollars and partially paid by the county's general fund. The library master order and the master IGA, which was approved several years ago, actually restrict the use of library district funds to operations only. It does not allow those funds to be used for construction. So in light of this, during the course of the conversations with stakeholders, they raised significant concerns regarding using these funds as part of repayment of the revenue bond. And that's $2.1 million for Gladstone, and another $2.1 million was included in the Oak Lodge budget, which we'll get to in a few minutes. The second major cost increase, quite frankly, is the cost of construction. And when our contractor has bid out the subs for this project, we're looking at an additional $2.4 million in costs. The construction industry, as you well know, has remained very volatile, and public and construction bids are increasing, some coming in over, actually 100% over the budget. The main causes of the volatility, it's included in the report. I don't know that I need to read these to you. Okay, you've put up, okay, thank you. So on the attached, your attachment is the PowerPoint, and thank you, Tony, for putting this up, okay. So this is for Gladstone, right? Okay. So the November estimate construction was 4.6 million. April estimate is 6.7 million. And the indirect costs are an additional 0.3 million. So that's where we get the $2.4 million difference, which I just referenced, going from $7 million in November to $9.4 million as of April. Excuse me, the next page shows you all the costs, the assumptions that we had, and the changes in that. So initially, the current county commitment was a $3.9 million of general funds. That was the county's portion of repayment of the revenue bond, plus, as I mentioned, the $200,000 in county ARPA funds. The additional funding that's needed now is $2.4 million for the cost escalation and $2.1 million to replace the library's portion of the revenue bond for an additional $4.5 million. The other funds going into this project include $500,000 of state ARPA funds and Gladstone beginning balance of $300,000. So this is where you get to the total project cost of $9.4 million. So based on all this, we have given you a variety of options, provided a variety of options. And before I get to those options, do you have questions?
Yeah, I just want to go over the, so cash money is $800,000 from ARPA and Gladstone, correct? 0.3 and 0.5 is $800,000.
Right, $500,000 of that is ARPA money, and $300,000 is Gladstone.
$800,000, correct.
Yes, Chair, correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Plus, they have brought in their own land,
Yes,
correct?
correct.
Okay, so do we have a value on the land?
I don't think we have a value on the land.
Anybody know? Why hasn't that been done? So when you do, I'd like a value on the land next time we revisit this. Thank you very much. Because this board at a previous meeting passed criteria for construction projects. And I'm sure everybody in the room is familiar with what that is. So the value of the land would add to what this board has previously agreed to do. And that's 25% of a project going forward of cash. And that would include land. Okay, so I don't know how much that land is worth. How big is the lot? Does anybody know?
It was the city hall plus the surrounding, excuse me, how much? 10,000 square feet.
10,000 square feet in the middle of Gladstone, so it's worth something. Okay, got it, okay. So I'm just trying to get on what we have available to us. And so, Gary, what is the action that's being requested from this board today?
Yes, so we are asking you to give direction on what you'd like to do about the library. There are several options in your staff report, but I'll say it, Commissioners, on behalf of staff, we are recommending that we pause this project until the cost of doing business lowers, because our dollar goes further if we were to pause when the cost of materials, construction, and so forth goes down. With the high cost of inflation, we are going to get less if we were to go forward today of the cost of this library than if we were to pause.
And our partners in this have agreed?
We have shared this with the City of Gladstone staff and the mayor, who has shared it with her council. They have shared that they are open to the pause. They understand the reasons why, that they would be open to that, yes.
Okay, thank you. And so we have some commissioners in there. I think the order is Paul, Sonia, and then Martha. So Paul, go ahead.
Yeah,
And then Martha.
some of my comments here today are going to affect really the next one about the Oak Lodge, but I'm going to talk about this one too here, and that is that more so this one than the next one as well. A couple of different things, and that is that when you, Chair, you mentioned the criteria that we discussed last week, and I would argue that, frankly, we need to look at them all in totality, not separately, because they all affect one another, and also the general fund considerably. So we have the ARPA option. I don't believe it would be wise to move forward with one at the top of market and then compromise or water down other projects in the future. So I think it's wise to consider a pause on all the projects, which I think I advocated for last year. Paying a top of market is simply not going to deliver the results we want. I don't think it's responsible. I don't think our general fund can frankly do that. And I'm talking about all the projects we discussed last week. So these two libraries are part of that. The other thing I'm going to be very, and Gary, you'll be attuned to this. This one here, more than the other one, really applies also under the umbrella, the jurisdiction of the library district and its purpose. And the purpose and the master order reference in the packet really speak to the role of the district and the promise. I won't say a promise, really. I mean, it was in writing what was going to happen with 3-310 when the district was formed. So we have to close the book on this. I see these as priorities. I see these as priorities because the voters in the entire county voted and said and delivered and approved Measure 3-310 for the purpose of closing this out and providing a library system. Granted, a lot of these libraries have been built and upgraded and are sizable. These are the two that help close this out. Granted, there are some general fund requirements. And I also think that the opportunity of ARPA dollars could augment that. But I think we have an obligation, because this has been on the books for such a long time, to close this out. So if the city of Gladstone is okay with the pause, I certainly don't want these projects to be watered down, so I would support the pause. And I will speak to the option that's not in this packet, but the Oak Lodge packet when we adjourn this and move to the next item.
Okay, we are talking about Gladstone today. We are not talking about other projects in the county. I really want my board to focus on the question and the decision point before us, and that is the Gladstone Library. Up next is Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Smith. I just want to remind everyone that part of the Gladstone this Gladstone Library is part of a settlement agreement based on a lawsuit, and that I would expect would take precedent over any sort of policy that this commission came up with about matching funds or this or that. But our lawyer, and our Jeff Munz is back there kind of smiling, shaking his head. That's just point number one. Point number two, I was really interested in what you said regarding the master order. It was, tell me if I'm wrong, but it was my understanding that this financing scheme was always predicated on the fact that the master order would be amended. So is to allow the repayment of the library's portion from library funds for their repayment of the revenue bond. Is there a change in that? Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, I think you did.
Commissioner, I don't think that it was predicated. Mitzi, was it?
Please come, whoever's going to speak, please come to the table.
Jeffrey Mums, please come forward.
Or maybe understood.
Please introduce yourself.
Maybe predicated isn't the correct word.
Hi, yes, Jeff Munz, Assistant County Counsel. In the settlement agreement with Gladstone, it was discussed that if necessary, the master order could be amended, and that was part of the timetable for implementation of the settlement agreement. So funding agreement, hard to say that it would be predicated upon it, but the parties certainly discussed if it was necessary, this would have to be done in a certain amount of time so that it wouldn't hold up the process.
Okay.
So that's what's in the settlement agreement. And then the IGA with Gladstone, of course, does not talk about that component. It just talks more about the timetable and the requirements for size, location, all those are the kind of terms that are part of that agreement.
Okay, so I appreciate that clarification. My other question, I don't know if either of you can answer this, but I'm thinking inflation is rising these construction costs right now, and we've just heard a report, I don't know if anybody heard it, the Consumer Price Index actually got a little breather for this last month, which was good news. Mm-hmm. But the way that, I'm going back to Economics 101 from when I was in college 30 years ago, so this is a while, but when inflation goes up, interest rates go up to constrict inflation, and we're seeing that happening in our economy. Have we done any analysis about the difference that will be in the future? So costs come down, but interest rates are higher, and we will have to pay more to pay back the bond. Have we done any financial analysis as to how that might affect the overall financing of these projects?
We haven't done that financial analysis per se because things are so volatile right now that anything we put out today, I wouldn't want to say this is it for a year from now. So,
Right.
yes.
But I mean, I'm just not wanting to rob Peter to pay Paul. I guess that might not be the right analogy. But to say, okay, we're going to delay all this because these costs are increased, but oh my gosh, now the interest rates are so high, we can't possibly repay these bonds.
We have not done that analysis, no.
Have we thought about that? Is that a consideration?
Well, I mean, it clearly is a consideration of the board. I mean, you're aware of, obviously, everything that's going on in the economy and whether or not, we initially had, if we were going to do a bond, we were looking at about 3.5%. We also were looking at the potential of actually minimizing the bond payments for this project and using general funds out of contingency. So there's various options that we would present to you. And I think, however, the conversation has been looking at, this is not the right time. And so when you all decide that you'd like to revisit this, we will be happy to explore all those options with you.
Okay. So I did, in full disclosure, have a conversation with Mayor Stemple, who is in support of delaying this for the cost to come down, and also, but to move forward with demolishing the building that's currently on the site, putting a sign up that says future home of the Gladstone Library. And because there's this interest in doing this responsibly, I'll be in support of the delay today.
Okay, we have other commissioners in the queue. Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Commissioner Schrader, you're up.
Yeah, I also had a conversation with Mayor Stemple, or left her a message in any case, because everyone knows I'm a library supporter. I believe the libraries are the heart of the community. I think they're necessary for quality of life, and they provide much-needed access to resources that people may not have access to otherwise. If Gladstone is okay with the pause, I would support this as well. My concern is, I don't even know if they've gotten far enough of what American Library Association standards that we haven't even got to the design phase. So that would include size, that would include space, that would include the population they're expecting to serve. So those are the kinds of questions as we move forward I'm going to have for the library folks. Because is it going to be a satellite library? Is it really just for Gladstone? Is the premises going to be serving the whole area, or we have two libraries that are basically serving?
Well, Commissioner, we have gone through a significant public participation in the design of the Gladstone Library, so all of that has been taken into consideration. That is serving the Gladstone area and a little bit around it, and then it's separate, obviously. Well, it's one library with two locations, Oak Lodge and Gladstone, but the design work has all been done, and the intent would be to finish the design work so that when the board is ready to move forward, we can just take off from there. And so we're looking at, I know there's been discussion about demolition of the current site, and that's not a problem to do this year as well. So, but all the design work has been approved by the community group that we've been involved with, the advisory committee, and so it's pretty much further along than anything else.
Okay, so they are meeting ALA standards, I guess, is my bottom line question, of what it takes to serve the population and the kinds of materials and options they have internally, as well as the operational piece of having a director, adult and children library services. That's all been discussed and all been pulled together.
It's all part of those projects, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, this is an important project, piling on money at this time when some construction materials are 300% higher in cost than they were a year ago, and some other materials have a 8-month waiting period to get delivered to the site. You've got your working drawings almost done. You can afford to complete those design drawings.
Correct.
And be prepared for when the costs come down to get this out for bid and get this thing built. So it's in the best interest of the people of Gladstone to pause this, to avoid moving ahead now and suffering buyer's remorse for buying at too high of a cost. So keep an eye on, finish your drawings, keep an eye on the market, and then be prepared to get a contract and get it built
Thank you.
when the time comes.
Gary, do we entertain a motion on the action today?
Yes, please.
Okay, I will entertain a motion that we pause the Gladstone Library for 1 year and monitor construction costs.
Chair, if I may?
Yeah, just a minute, my microphone wasn't on. I'm going to recommend that we make a motion to pause the Gladstone Library because the city of Gladstone has agreed to this for 1 year. Isn't that the agreement, Gary, that we have with the
We use the
city?
term up to 1 year.
Up to 1 year. Up to 1 year and monitor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll second that.
All right.
That was a clarification, yeah, not a year. but
My
up to.
microphone wasn't on and my computer's not working like it should be because it keeps turning off and I never know what my packet materials are. So staff, help me with this, please.
Chair Smith, you're doing great with all of
I
that.
don't know. It's just, all right. Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Is the motion clear?
Yes.
Okay. Tony?
Sorry, was there a second?
Yeah, I seconded.
Apologize,
Yeah.
thank you.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, staff and Cindy, for coming forward.
Excuse me, Chair, we also need for the record a vote on the revenue bond payment option.
I thought we made a decision on that. Have we not,
Haven't
Gary?
not
Discussed that in
publicly.
executive session. You have not publicly discussed this.
Okay, and so what is that question before us?
The question is whether we amend the master order or use county funds to pay the library portion of the board.
Okay,
Excuse me, the
Gary,
bond, excuse
would
me.
you please opine on that?
Yeah, so staff recommendation is, and you have discussed this in executive session, is that do not use the library district funds for construction. That was not the intent of the voters 14 years ago. So I'd advise you, it's option A, B in your staff report. Use county funds to pay on what you see in the PowerPoint, what was identified as revenue payment from the library district funds. We will not use that. Instead, we'll use county general funds.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, Gary, kind of getting back to what the point Commissioner Fisher was talking about earlier with regards to balancing, I guess, in my words, balancing the potential of increasing interest costs versus doing it now, so to speak. And I would say that consideration of ARPA could be factored into that to avoid higher interest rates. So I'm just wondering on these options here, I don't want to foreclose the option. I agree, we should not amend the master order. We should not use library district funds for capital construction. That's in violation of what the voters voted for. But however, whether it's escalation or even just paying for it with or without escalation, let's just say prices stabilize, that using ARPA dollars in lieu of or lowering the bonding costs or eliminating a bond altogether, just cash pays for it with ARPA dollars shouldn't be ruled out here. I want to make sure we don't do that today. That all doors are open, so when we hit the go button on these two libraries, we can move on them.
You are correct, Commissioner, so forgive me. You do not have to use county general funds. You could use county general funds, or you could use ARPA dollars. That's a decision for you to make later, but we'll bring all these options to you when that time comes. Thank you.
So what do we need to do today? In light of that, what do we need to do today on this?
If you're willing, Commissioners, I would recommend a motion, so it's on the record, that you will not use library district operational funds for construction.
So moved.
Seconded.
A motion has been made not to use library district operating funds for construction by Commissioner Savas and approved by Commissioner Scholl. And Commissioner Scholl, you had your light on.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, are we sure that this $2.1 million will not grow In other words, is it $2.1 million, or are we going to get a surprise?
Again, you, as far as the construction cost? There's
Yes.
no, this is not locked, it is not locked in. It could grow, yes. Which is why we hope with the pause that the cost of everything will go down.
Okay.
Before you move forward.
Okay.
Hey, Commissioner Fisher.
Depending on inflation, will go down.
So I don't recall a conversation, maybe my commissioners can enlighten me. what
In
we
executive
talked-
session?
In executive session.
did.
Yeah, well, I'm not arguing it.
Oh.
My recollection is when we agreed with the settlement agreement with Gladstone, and that the master order was something that that's how we were going to do it, and that's how we were going to get there. So I'm not sure where the input came from, what the community engagement is, what happened there, because I'm not the library liaison. So if I could just get more information.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I think that the question about whether or not we could use library district revenues for payment of these capital expenses has been a topic of controversy or conversation for quite some time, which is why it was discussed at the time of the settlement with the city of Gladstone. Because we all recognize that this is something that people had different opinions about, and that if we were going to attempt to use those funds and thought that was the best interest of constructing the library, we would make an attempt then to change the master order so that it was clear. I think it was an argument to be made both ways, that it could be allowed or could not be allowed. And so this is what was contemplated at the time of the settlement is, whatever the answer is there, if it's necessary to change the master order, we would do so. But that decision was put off until a later time as a way of it was in the agreement such that if we were going to do it, it needed to be done in a certain amount of time so it wouldn't hold up the project. And so now we are here today with this question of, if you wanted to change the master order, you could do so, or as you've just made a motion to decide not to change the master order and move forward with county funds or other funds, but not library district revenues. So that's why it was in the settlement agreement, is because we knew it was an issue that we needed to address, but it didn't need to be addressed in the context of a mediation and then a settlement document. It was one that we highlighted for later discussion.
Okay. I don't know what the community input is. I'm not sure legally, you say it could go either way. I don't want to foreclose an option if it's the will of the community and the will of prior boards and this board's to amend the master order to allow the repayment in that form. I don't want to foreclose an option without
I think
all
I
of
can
the
answer that.
information.
Tony, can you take this off our screen?
Yes, Madam
We're
Chair.
done with this PowerPoint presentation, so, yeah, okay. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, so Jeff's right, Mr. Munz is right, that we were supposed to look at it. There was more of an impetus to get the agreement in place and get it signed and get all that done than there was figuring out dollar to dollar where everything came from to assemble this. I would say that there is no community outcry to use library district operating funds for the very purpose of it would undermine the ability to maintain the library and the operations, which there's not enough money to do that. So by tapping this as a source to pay the revenue bond, you are limiting the ability to actually operate the library. So the community is very concerned about that, and such that I don't know of anyone of the public that would support us amending the master order and using library district funds to build it and not having the funds to operate it.
No, well, that's a really good point.
That is.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Welcome.
Again, what is the question before us right now, Gary?
So the motion on the table, do not use library district operating funds for construction.
Okay, Tony, take the poll.
Yes, Madam Chair. Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Next question. We have another question.
The next session is on the Oak Lodge.
You have to hold a
Okay.
second.
What about the 2.1, Gary?
All right.
2.1 million, do we need to address that today?
No.
Okay, let's not.
Not making no financial decisions any other than we're pausing this project. We'll come back to you as the market stabilizes and bring options of how to fund the county's contribution to the Gladstone Library. There is one small piece. We will have to amend an intergovernmental agreement between the city of Gladstone and Clackamas County to reflect this delay. We've already heard signals that the city council and staff are open to that, so we'll formalize that up pretty soon here, Jeff. County Council will come back to you on that.
We'll work together and get that done within the next week.
What was that? I can't hear.
We'll work with county council to get the amendment, the IGA amended within the next week and present that language to the city of Gladstone.
Thank you very much.
And then
Okay.
quickly, Tony, our outstanding clerk here, he went online to find the value of the Gladstone land, which you asked for, Commissioners. This is per our assessor's office online function. The assessed value is $657,547. The market value, though, is $1,072,670, the value of the land in Gladstone. Thank you, Tony, for finding that. All right, with your permission, Chair, we'll move to the next policy session, which is also on libraries. Next is the Oak Lodge Library. Cindy will also present. Jeff, you better stick around, please.
Thank
Cindy,
you.
go ahead.
So I'm not going to go over the same issues that we went over on Gladstone, but it is the same issues. We have cost escalation. We have the issue also about the so we have three issues with Oak Lodge. We have the design of the Oak Lodge Library, we have the conversation about repayment of the bond, and the last issue is about the going forward or not going forward. So we're looking for your direction in three areas. Let me start with the library design. Do you want me to? You don't want to put this up? Okay, fine. So the library design, we had three different designs, and this came after the December meeting that we had with the board, where you asked us to go back and meet with community. If you recall, the December policy session was about the concern about the funds involved with funding the initial master plan that was presented to you over a year ago. You asked us to go back out to the community. We had several meetings with the task force, with the library board, and also with the NCPRD Development Advisory Council. And so the three options we presented to these groups were, the first option was the master plan, where the library was connected to the Concord Community Center. The second option was a reduced size library and a reduced size community center. And the third option was a freestanding library that was not attached, but also a reduced scope of the community center. Basically, the conversations quickly ruled out option number 2. There wasn't a lot of interest in that, so the focus became on option number 1 and option number 3. We held several meetings. There were FAQs after those meetings. There were notes of those meetings. Those are all on the county's website for the library, and we'd be happy to produce any of those for you. After we went through, we had about 8 different community meetings with the groups. And there's a list of the groups that were made either formal resolutions or a consensus was reached to support option 3, which was the freestanding library. The task force, on the second page, a task force was made, motion was made in both meetings in March, where the task force did reach consensus on the freestanding library. There was not consensus, however, about where that library should be on the property, but there was consensus about a freestanding library. The Clackamas County Library Advisory Board, I was asked to say that, and specifically the words Library District Advisory Board was not technically correct. So I needed to add Clackamas County Library Advisory Board. Also made a recommendation to have the Oak Lodge Library freestanding and separate from the Concord building, as did Jennings Lodge, as did the Oak Grove Community Council, as did the NCPRD District Advisory Council. So all those groups over the past several months did recommend that the library be freestanding and separate. There's been questions about the square footage of the library. In the agreement, it states that the Oak Lodge Library would be 19,500 square feet. However, the IGA did allow for an adjustment of the size based on feasibility study and community needs. And so what I provided for you here is the comparison of option 1 and option 3. On the size of it, the option 1 was 500 square feet. The big difference between option 1 and option 3 on square footage is that option 1 includes 3,800 square feet of shared space with the NCPRD building. So it was never solely library space. And so we're really looking at the functional library space of the 10,000 square feet compared to the 9,000 square feet, and then the library support space. So if you take out the 3,800 square feet, that was the shared space, option 1 and option 3 are very close in terms of actual library designated space. So before I move forward, I want to entertain any questions.
Chair, I think in the interest of time, I think we can possibly move this along, maybe if we just look at the options one at a time and just deal with them. So great job, Cindy. One recommendation I would make, if you read all the input in the letters that are in the packet, there's really not much in the way of referencing option 3 so much as it is with the freestanding library. So I'm prepared, if the board's willing, I'm prepared to make a motion to just say, let's move forward with a freestanding library. So I move that we move forward with the freestanding library.
Seconded.
Well, what square footage on that?
1,000.
The option 3 square footage is the 15,150 square feet.
So, I'm still in the queue. So at 15,000 square foot library, is there enough funds in the operating budget to manage and maintain that? Now, with Gladstone Library, is 6,000 square feet, and the city of Gladstone is offering, I believe, Gary, some of their staff to help run and maintain that. However, in the Oak Lodge Library situation, I don't see any matching opportunities coming forward with either staff and/or willingness to pay a bond to construct it. At this point, I'm going to have trouble moving forward with that because we are approving something here today, Paul, which is exactly what you said you didn't want to do. You didn't want to move forward on a construction project when we didn't have the numbers. I think that is, folks, irresponsible to move forward on approving this when we did what we did to Gladstone. Now, I just did some math a minute ago, and with what the criteria this board passed, was it last week, Gary? The criteria was 25% matching cash going forward. Gladstone has met that criteria, bringing $800,000 cash, and the land value that's coming in at $1 million is $1.8 million. So if the construction costs of Gladstone, as we are trying to do, is at $6.3 million, 25% of 6.3 million is 1.575 million, of which they are over the threshold of bringing in 25% cash. I can't vote for this today because we don't know how we're going to staff it. We don't know what the operating budget for this is yet. I have yet to see an operating budget from either the library district or any other staff, and I don't know how we're going to afford to build it. That's the option. We have several people in the queue. Commissioner Schrader, you're up.
Yeah, thank you for that, Commissioner. And I did vote to have set criteria. So my suggestion is to work with the population there, because I do believe that we do need to have a library for those folks. They've been waiting a really long time. And I think we should give them an option to take a look and see how, when, where possibly they could meet that criteria, but I did not see them as so set in stone that it could potentially eliminate the possibility of a library there. So I do think we need criteria, because I think we kind of have to have a box for there one way or the other, but let's give them an opportunity and a chance to meet the criteria.
Cindy, go ahead.
Commissioners, this is a little bit of a chicken and egg-ish situation. And in terms of design, we won't know the cost until we agree on a design, on an option. So, because there are different costs associated with them. So it's difficult for us to give the final costs until we have that. On the other hand, we don't want to go too far down the road and commit dollars until we know what those are going to be. What I do want to draw your attention to on your documents, there are additional funds coming in for the construction of the Oak Lodge Library. There were specific funds set aside, and Mitzi, if you want to come and speak to that, it's on page 3 of your attachment. There were specific funds set aside before the master order for the construction of the Oak Lodge Library. And you see that this .75, the 2.9, and the 1.0. Those were all set aside, so those are available for the construction of the library. The other piece that I think is important to mention is that with the Gladstone Library delaying up to a year, we still believe we'll be able to access the state ARPA dollars, which must be spent by June of 2024. If we don't start working on Oak Lodge, in other words, if we delay Oak Lodge for a year, we still believe we can get the $750,000 that is designated for Oak Lodge. But if we don't make any decisions on Oak Lodge and don't even start design on Oak Lodge, then we're probably not going to make that $750,000. So I just want to be, be transparent and full disclosure of all the money at play. So that's why, again, it gets very chicken and eggish, because we need to start somewhere on putting the cost together, but we need certain decisions to be able to do that.
Okay, Cindy, we have $750,000 for Oak Lodge. How much more do we have, cash sitting there?
So the Oak Lodge, there's $2.9 million in library district's reserves that were set aside for construction, and another $1 million in capital reserve. And again, this is not operating dollars.
Right, capital reserves.
Right, and then the .75 in Oak Lodge beginning fund balance.
And how much?
$750,000.
We just said that at the beginning. Oh, 750 capital construction and 750 in ARPA. This is the same
Yes.
number, two different funds,
So it's
correct?
$5.4 million with all of those.
Yeah, there's over 4 million available right now without ARPA.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
In terms of operating funds for Oak Lodge, they are solvent. They are fine. Operating dollars for Oak Lodge are fine. We've gone through the numbers, and there's not an issue with Oak Lodge operating dollars.
okay. There's not, so you're making that promise to me, it's not a problem until you run into a problem.
Provided that you make the decision to pay that
Okay, would you please speak louder? I know it's difficult.
provided that you make that decision to pay the 2.1 revenue bond that in the past we were forecasting that the library would pay out of operating expenses. Provided that you make that decision, moving forward, we should be fine with operating costs.
Okay, at 15,000 square feet is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, I do have trouble with the motion as presented. I think it does need a contingency in the motion. But we have other commissioners up here. Commissioner Fisher, I think you're next.
Yeah, so I think Cindy and Mitzi also alluded to this, but we can approve option 1 or option 3 under the first choice decision point that we're making today. I am fine with moving forward with that. I do believe that maintaining all of the other resources is critical, and so doing the planning, we have not started planning for the Oak Lodge Library, so beginning that process, and Cindy's kind of shaking her head, I believe that keeps us in the queue to receive the other state dollars. I'm not sure which representative, was it Karn Power that
Yes.
dedicated her
Yeah.
dollars to this? I think that's real important to not lose sight of that. So I'm good with doing this piecemeal as the options are presented to us, seconding, or if somebody already seconded Commissioner Savis's motion, moving forward with that.
Yeah, and I just,
Just a minute, look, we have people that haven't talked yet. Paul, you're in the queue.
I won't
A lot
talk.
of people are in the queue, so I really need to maintain
Yep.
balance with this. Are you finished?
One other thought I just want clarification on. The Oak Lodge Library, along with Gladstone, is part of a two-location, one library system, which was part of the overall settlement agreement that we did. So it is a legal agreement, and I just want to preface that. So, and Gary Schmidt was shaking his head, Jeffrey Munns was shaking his head, any policy capital construction prioritization is not relevant for this conversation. So Commissioner Schrader, your vote did not potentially kill the libraries on
Well,
that. So I just want to make sure that we get all on the same page.
Well, no,
We're not all on the same page because you keep bringing up that. So therefore, it takes us off when we jump down another rabbit hole, Commissioner Fisher. So wait, pause. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
I'm not a rabbit. Okay. So, as we move forward on the freestanding library, 15,000 square feet. You've got the money to do design work through to the working drawing phase so that your library, Oak Grove Library, will be ready for construction when that time comes and when the market is affordable, correct?
Well, that's what I need to talk with you about, and that's in the third part. In terms of the
Okay.
dollars, we're looking at about $1.8 to $2 million to do that design work for the Oak Lodge Library.
Okay, and you're going to ensure that your design firm knows that you want a library that's functional and affordable.
Oh, they know
Where
it
there
very
is,
well.
there is affordability built into the design, okay? So that the people of the area get the library they want. You've got a project that's had good common sense worked into it, and it's ready with working drawings. And so when the market avails itself, you can proceed with construction and get this library done, right?
Commissioner, yes, I'm a big proponent of telling people how much money they have and designing to that.
Yes, exactly right, because if you give them the world, how long's a string, it can get pretty long.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
Okay, Commissioner Savas and then Commissioner Schrader.
Yeah, so what I want to do, just to make things go a little bit quicker, was to just clarify, but I got that opportunity now. So the committing to option, or committing to the motion to build a freestanding library does not, is not a commitment to starting construction at any particular time for any particular cost. It's just to do what Cindy said, complete the final design, the chicken before the egg. We got to get this going, and that allows them to do that. And without getting into the weeds, I think that it's a safe place. That's why the option's there. I just want to strike, I deliberately not using the word option 3 because there's some other entanglements or assumptions in there,
Okay.
and this cleans it up.
Thank you for that clarification, Paul. Gary Schmidt, you're up.
Yes, Commissioners, would you consider amending your motion to add the word design? So it would be move forward on the design of a 15,000
Okay.
square foot library.
I will amend my motion, so I move to change the motion to move forward with a freestanding library design.
Seconded.
Okay, I'm better with that. Okay, now, Paul, are you done? Okay, Commissioner Schrader.
Well, I don't want to muddy the waters anymore, Chair, so I promise I'm not going to do that. I was just knowing, again, that there were dollars available and set aside for this library. So I was looking at those construction criteria. Basically, I think it's there. I think any criteria like that can be met.
Commissioner,
That's
there's
what
a
I want to say.
placeholder in the budget, and we're waiting for that.
I also want to say, does anybody know where the original plan was for the Gladstone Library way back in the day?
I'm
I
sorry,
mean, in
Commissioner.
other words, Gladstone, back in the day,
The one that was voted down by voters?
yes,
Yes.
there's a design out there somewhere. It might be interesting to take a look at that. I mean, I don't know, maybe you can just move it to the other place. I mean, but
Commissioner-
there is a design sitting on somebody's shelf in Gladstone somewhere. And it was a bigger library, and it might, and it sounds like the site at the Concord
was,
site,
remember that.
maybe maybe that could help inform, get things started a little bit if they got to look at it. Just a thought.
If I could make one comment.
Excuse me?
No.
Go ahead, sir. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the past design would require a vote of the people, the city of Gladstone.
Okay.
Because of a measure that was passed recently with the nature park, it would require a vote.
But you're talking about using
I'm
the
using it, no, I'm talking about using it for
Oak Lodge.
informing Oak Lodge.
Oh, okay.
That's
Okay.
all. I'm not talking about using it for Gladstone. It's like there is a
Looking for
design.
I'm looking for a cliff to drive off of.
That's all. That's what I'm saying. Why, are you going to reinvent the wheel, or is there something viable out there that would help move things along, is all I'm saying.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So if this motion is to pass today, Gary and Jeff Mums, it does not preclude us to going to the voters and asking them if they want to finish paying, correct?
That is correct.
In a bond. Okay, good. Okay, without seeing any further comments, thank you, Commissioners. Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Hallelujah, aye, yeah.
Chair Smith?
Aye, motion passes 5-0. What else, Cindy?
Sorry, Commissioners, but I also, again, publicly on the repayment of the bond, I'm not using the Oak Lodge operating dollars for repayment of the bond, same vote that you did for Gladstone.
Yes, I'll entertain a motion.
Well, Chair, I will. I just want to just add a comment before I make this motion so you'll understand why I'm changing the language here. So I do not want to foreclose the option of using ARPA as opposed to encumbering the county fund. So I want to keep all options open. I think the main point of the question here is whether or not to amend the master order. We already decided not to for the Gladstone Library. So I'm going to make a similar motion to the last one with regard to the library, that we kind of leave that funding option open with the presumption that it is, the general fund or ARPA. But the motion is not to amend the master order for revenue bond repayment.
Gary has his hand up.
Commissioners, I feel that the prior motion you already made encompasses the entire library district, so you don't need to make a second motion here. The other
Yeah,
motion
I don't
covers it.
think we're going to entertain any more motions
Okay, good.
today. I think, you know what, we've done enough on this. They're going to go ahead on the design. I am sure we have about 1,000 more meetings ahead of us on this. Whatever we say from this point forward, it will just fall on mute ears. So we've made some decisions today. We're going to go ahead on that. Correct, Cindy? Are you done?
When you ask like that. Chair, I just want to be clear that you have approved the design, and we are not approving any construction at this point. It's just a design of the Oak Lodge.
That's right.
Thank you. That's what
And
I need
does
to
that
know.
work? That's good?
Affordable.
Affordable, yes, Commissioner.
Which essentially looks like option 4, which reads, proceed with the necessary design work but delay construction to provide more time for the market to stabilize. That's consistent with everything we've done today.
Right. That's good.
Gary?
Sorry. I'm going to respectfully suggest, Commissioners, you make a motion to option 4, because I think if you don't, people could say you made the motion on Gladstone, but not Oak Lodge, and you want
Well,
to
we
be
did pass
consistent.
for the design of Oak Lodge, Gary. We
Yes,
just
but-
voted on that.
But you did not say pausing on construction.
I'm fine. I move to proceed with option 4, proceed with necessary design work but delay construction to provide more time for the market to stabilize.
Second.
Commissioner Savas has made the motion to continue with design and pause on construction, and Commissioner Schrader has seconded that motion. Further discussion, Commissioner Fisher.
I am just curious, how long does a design, doesn't that take a while to design a library?
We'll look for about a year.
Okay, so I think this is not necessary. I know our county administrator thinks so, but it's superfluous.
Probably is, but you know what? We get a vote on superfluous.
All right.
Commissioner Scholl.
Yeah, I think the motion's a good idea. because
Okay,
it
let's
will-
vote on it then. Tony, take the poll.
Madam Chair.
Geez, guys, you're killing me here.
Are you hungry?
No, get done.
Go ahead, Tony.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
No, just kidding. Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, it passes unanimous, folks, 5-0, just saying. Okay, Gary, anything else before
That
us
is
today?
it for today, Chair.
We are adjourned. Thank you for the good work, Commissioners.